Welcome everyone. I think we can start. Most welcome to everyone to join our SADC Forum. This is a monthly event organized by the Southern Africa Documentation and Cooperation Center in Vienna, and in this case in cooperation with the Austrian Namibia Friendship Society. So welcome to all of you, particularly our members. We have already been informed about the technicalities of the Zoom meeting. I think you don't need to repeat that. And I would like to introduce now the two speakers to you. Our main speaker tonight is Rinaani Musutua. Okay, she can be seen. Thank you for coming despite the problem, as I have said already. Rinaani is the coordinator of the campaign, the new campaign in Namibia to have a basic income grant introduced. She has a rich experience in both business and NGO work. She was also working as a press liaison officer. So a long-standing experience on important social but also environmental issues. Rinaani has studied in Sweden, if I am not mistaken, and in London. She speaks so many languages that I have actually forgotten all of them, but I mean, German is one of them, if your website is correct, or if your whatever entry in a website. But we will stick to English, and if someone wants to ask a question or make a comment in German language, it is of course also fine, we can interpret. As Herbert has mentioned already, Rinaani Musutua is also a trustee in the Economic and Social Justice Trust, which I believe will be introduced more extensively. It is one of the main organizations behind the Basic Income Grant Coalition. From the Austrian side, we have been brought into contact to Rinaani last year, and but this is the first time now that we see each other and can exchange views and information directly and not only by email and other technical means. So Rinaani will be our main speaker, followed by a comment by Lukas Schlögl from the University of Vienna Institute of Political Science. Lukas Schlögl is an expert in comparative political analysis, if I hope that is the correct translation. He studied international development at the University of Vienna, later then studied in Finland and in London. So Rinaani and Lukas have a sort of Scandinavian and England background. Mr. Schlögl has been with the Austrian Foundation for Development Research for a short while, has filled teaching posts in various universities in different countries, different continents actually, and has published on poverty eradication and inequality, labor issues, but also new technologies. So the idea behind this evening tonight was that Rinaani gives us a comprehensive introduction into the idea or the demand of a basic income grant, which is not new to Namibia. That has got a long-standing history, but now as a new impetus to have it politically implemented, not at least because of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think you will explain more in detail what that is about. And that would be followed by a comment by Lukas Schlögl, who is familiar with the international debates on basic income grant, poverty eradication. And so we hope that it will turn out to become a dialogue between the Namibian experience and Namibian strategies and plans, and some international experience which might be consistent or not consistent. But I think both sides can learn or can have insights from the comment and from the presentation. So having said that, I think it is a pleasure to me to hand over the floor to Rinaani for about a presentation of about maybe 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and then we go to Lukas Schlögl for the comment. So Rinaani, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Walter, for that holistic introduction. It was all well done. Thank you so much. Yes, so as it was said before, I'm the Economic and Social Justice trustee, and I'm also a community activist. And the Economic and Social Justice Trust is part of the Basic Income Grant Coalition of Namibia. My presentation today will be on the I will first start with explaining the socioeconomic situation in Namibia, and then why we need BIG in Namibia. And then I'll be talking about what BIG means for Namibia in practical terms. And then I'll give a historic background on the BIG coalition, its early activities, and what response they got from the public. And then I'll be talking about, the campaign that we've relaunched now and what response we've been getting and what kind of activities we are busy with. And I will end with the way forward for us. So the socio-economic situation in Namibia, it doesn't look good at all at the moment. Namibia is one of the most unequal countries in the world, with high unequal income distribution in the world. So we have about 2/3 of Namibians that live below the poverty line. And that is as a result of the apartheid era policies that were unfortunately maintained by the ruling elite. They didn't do much on, addressing those colonial inequality legacies. We have a very high unemployment rate, and inequality, as I said before, it's extreme. Poverty it's terrible. People are really struggling in Namibia. A lot of people are struggling, and people are poorly paid. So the salaries that they get, it's barely enough to survive on in a month. So these problems still continue in Namibia long after independence, 30 years after independence. And obviously, because of all the inequalities, it's mainly the Blacks who are affected by the inequality and poverty that we get in Namibia. There's a UNDP report on human development that came out in 2019, and that report said that Namibia is one of the countries in the world with extreme differences between the rich and the poor, without any efforts being made to tackle the problem. So yes, we do have huge, poverty problems in Namibia. And we regard poverty as an economic violence which infringes on people's human rights. And we feel that basic income grant will not only help reduce poverty, but it will also lay a strong foundation for the empowerment of Namibians, and also grant them their economic rights. We believe that BIG will restore people's human dignity, because it frees people from becoming active and proud members of society, therefore providing, so BIG will therefore provide people a dignified life for all Namibians. I'll talk about that a little bit later when I get to the outcome of the Oshivero BIG pilot project. So what BIG actually means in practical terms for Namibia, it's a periodic cash transfer, which is paid regularly, for example, every month. In our cases, we want we had a once-off grant in Namibia just at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll also talk a little bit about that later on. So as I said before, it's a cash payment. It is paid in an appropriate medium or exchange, allowing those who receive it to decide what they spend it on. It's not like the government's going to decide for you what you should spend your money on. It's nothing like the food, bank kind of thing where you sometimes get food that you don't really need, and then people end up selling that food to get money. Maybe they needed soap or something else. It's not a voucher. It's just, cash that a person gets. So it's individual. It's not by a household. So say, for example, if you have 5 people in the household, all those people get their cash payment. It's just not one payment per family. It's every individual in that family that will be getting the BIG if it gets implemented, as we hope. It's universal, that it doesn't really want you to prove all the time if you are poor or unemployed. It's not means tested to say. So I'll be talking a little bit now about the giving a bit of a historic background on how this whole basic income grant coalition started, and the campaign as well. It was in 2002 that the government appointed what you call a Namibian tax consortium. So it's a group of experts from all over that were asked to come and review the tax system of Namibia, and also maybe give a bit of an idea to government what can be done to reduce poverty in Namibia, because they pointed out that there won't be any economic development if poverty and inequality is not tackled. So in that process, they proposed or suggested to government that the basic income grant would be a really good thing to have for Namibia, because it would be the most effective way of reducing poverty and inequality in a very short period of time. So they suggested the grant, and then they felt that you also proposed that the grant could be financed through progressive tax expenditure on the rich, or one could also increase the value-added tax, the VAT as we call it, or by introducing a tourist levy, or bed levy to call it. And then one could also increase tax on alcohol and tobacco and all these luxury products that people mostly would import from abroad. The consortium got the idea from South Africa, where trade unions and NGOs and churches and some government social security experts had also proposed a BIG to be useful in South Africa and reduce poverty. So it was actually that commission's recommendations that motivated the formation of the BIG coalition and the campaign. So in 2004, the BIG coalition was formed. It was spearheaded by the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Republic of Namibia, and a cross-section of civil society umbrella organizations, for example, religious groups, youth groups, and trade unions. So this came together and decided to set up the BIG coalition and start promoting the BIG to have it introduced in Namibia. So the BIG coalition's proposal was exactly in line with what the NAMTAX Commission's recommendations were, and they were hoping that every Namibian should have a citizen's right to BIG, which would be not less than 100 Namibian dollars per month, until they became eligible for state pension when they turned 60. The state pension in Namibia is universal as well. Anybody can get it. It's not means tested. All you need to do is apply, and then you get it. The BIG coalition felt that the BIG should be a cash transfer, which would allow recipients to decide freely on what it is that they would use the money on. Nobody, had to decide for them, because they know their personal circumstances better, so they would be allowed that freedom to buy what they needed. We saw it as an act of empowering people by giving them the freedom and the personal responsibility towards the money that they will be receiving, it really feels good to just have a little bit money on you. You just start feeling like a human being when you get that little money, if you usually have nothing at all. It really empowers you. So the whole BIG, we thought, is an economic right, actually, and it's not an act of charity. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well, why I say it's not an act of charity. The BIG coalition, got a lot of support from all around. It was not only the members that supported the idea. It was numerous groups and individuals and local businesses and churches, also international agencies that gave support and encouraged us. And some government officials as well showed interest, and they were willing to develop a more universalistic system of social protection in Namibia, and also economic empowerment. The proposed amount of 100, which is about, that time it was about maybe 10 euros or 12 US dollars, it constituted only about a third of what was needed to rise above the poverty level. BIG obviously alone, that 100 wouldn't be enough to wipe out poverty, but at least, as we feel, it would have been enough, or it could be enough, to guarantee some basic food security. We thought that it was a step towards realizing some of the people's basic rights, so they can enjoy a reasonable standard of living. At least, you've got food on the table, and then you can continue struggling for other things, but at least you've eaten, you are not struggling on an empty stomach for further survival. So the campaign strategy's main focus when we started was to engage policymakers and convince them that BIG was an efficient and affordable way of reducing poverty in Namibia. The argument was that, as I mentioned before, it's a basic economic right in line with the welfare provision of the Namibian constitution. So there's a provision in the Namibian constitution which says that the government has the responsibility towards safeguarding the people's well-being, or to make sure that they don't live in adverse poverty. Obviously we know by research that we've done that BIG has a low administrative cost. Because of that, the BIG believed or thought that it would be possible to convince government that they should implement BIG because it's cheap and it's efficient. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. With all the convincing evidence that we had, government, the different agencies within the government were not really for it. Some were for it, others were not for it, especially the finance ministry, which didn't like the idea because the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank advised them against any cash grants. God knows why, I don't know. Although it would have only required around 5% of the national budget, which would go towards a yearly BIG. That could have been paid back through adjusting the tax system, which wouldn't be such a huge or hassle at all. It's a very easy thing to do because Namibia's taxes are regularly changed. The coalition needed to increase pressure, of course, on the government to introduce BIG. So it was decided that the only way we could convince the government is if we, show it in real life how BIG would work. And that's why we ended up piloting the BIG idea, which was actually the very first cash payment pilot project in the world. So we had to decide on where to hold it. So the coalition had traveled to various regions in Namibia to choose the best location. And we ended up choosing the Oshivero settlement. It's about 100 kilometers away from Windhoek, east of Windhoek. And it became a BIG pilot project site in 2008, and until the pilot project ended in 2009. That's because Oshivero is a small settlement. It's previous farm workers and unemployed people who just settled on this government portion, and there was severe poverty, and that's why it was chosen to be the pilot project site. The pilot project site was mainly funded by international organization, mostly churches from Germany, which we were really thankful for. And so the pilot started, and we had excellent results from it. It really made a huge difference to the life of that settlement. Household poverty dropped by around 37%, and food poverty also dropped by 42%, from 42% to 17%. That resulted in a huge reduction in child malnutrition. What a huge difference that made. And families access health services more. I mean, to go to the clinic to get medical attention doesn't cost a lot. Now it costs about eight Namibian dollars, but trust me, there are a lot of people in this country that don't have that 8 Namibian dollars, and they struggle to survive. So people, now that they had money, they used to go to the clinic more to get medical attention that they needed, especially with the high HIV rates that were, in that settlement. So the local clinic actually made more money. They used to make 250 per month. And after the BIG was introduced, they were making 1,300. Another wonderful thing that we strongly use to push for BIG implementation is that the economic activities in that settlement increased from 44% to 55%. Residents engaged in self-employment activities. Some started making bricks and selling, some started bakeries and dressmaking, and some people set up little shops, and some were selling wood, and some also made little gardens, and they were planting lots of different vegetables, and they were selling to one another. So there was quite a lot of economic activities going on during the BIG pilot study. And that's amazing, because that gives people, BIG gives people an opportunity to contribute to society, and because it unleashes their entrepreneurial potential. School attendance increased as well. Before, there were like 40% of kids not going to school, and when people had that little money, they were now regularly paying school fees. Basic education in Namibia is free now, but then it wasn't, so people had to pay school fees. But that's a whole completely different story to tell. It's actually not that free at the end of the day. The basic education in Namibia, it costs even more now that they say it's for free. And that resulted in 5% drop in children skipping school, and their marks improved as well, because now they were now regularly attending school. And the police also recorded a significant reduction in crime, which fell by 42%, which is really good as well. That's something that we can use to really push for the implementation. And another important thing is that the gender inequality improved, because people were so poor, homemakers, as we say, and other women in the community had no income security. And now that they got BIG, they had some income insecurity, so they didn't have to engage in what we call transactional sex, where like, I do this for you and you give me this, that kind of agreement that people sometimes have. Then there was also prostitution in the area, and that had extremely gone down. People had their own little money now to at least be able to provide some food for themselves and their families. And the household debt also reduced from 1,215 to 772, while savings increased. So these wonderful findings from Oshivero really contradicts what people say about BIG leading to irresponsibility and laziness and alcoholism. It's actually completely different from that. Most people really make good use of the good opportunities that are presented to them, and they really take the initiative to improve their livelihoods, as proven by this wonderful world acclaimed BIG Oshivero pilot study. So the project was throughout evaluated and guided by international team, as well as local teams and experts. And as I said before, it's an exemplary study which it encouraged a lot of other countries to carry out similar studies. And you know, BIG has become a really huge thing now because of the COVID. And I'm pretty sure you are aware that a lot of countries are now trying it out. But Namibia was the very first country actually to try it out. So with all these, you know, encouraging results from the project, the coalition, we were like really optimistic that it would, now this would really convince government to. That wasn't the case, even though the results were widely distributed to local media, and we held regular media briefings, and we took part in radio and television programs, and even invited journalists to go to Oshivero and see for themselves the results of the BIG. The international world also knew about it, and some journalists from across the world came to visit the settlement. And we went around the country holding lots of different meetings with lots of people, you know, to share the whole idea of BIG. And you know, some of those meetings were addressed by the Oshivero people themselves, just to make sure that people get the first and also experience from the people themselves who've been receiving BIG. Actually, one thing that I forgot to mention is that when people found out that there was BIG being given in the Oshivero settlement, there was a huge migration. So you can see that, you know, maybe BIG would help to keep people in the places where they are, because we have a huge influx of people coming from rural area into the cities and towns, bigger towns. And yeah, that has made a housing that has caused a housing problem in Namibia. So we were hoping, you know, that with all these activities, we really worked hard, that we would, you know, that it would lead to a growing grassroots demand for BIG. And we also thought that, you know, by holding meetings with political leaders, that would lead them you know, to think that BIG is a really good thing. And some of the parliamentarians as well were invited to Oshivero to go and see for themselves, you know, the impact of the BIG on their community. And some of the representatives, you know, government and MPs and other political party representatives, before visiting Oshivero were a bit, you know, not sure whether, yeah, they were skeptical of the whole idea. But then after them going there to seeing the results themselves with their own eyes, you know, they were more receptive towards the idea. And that definitely made us feel that, wow, this is definitely going to be discussed heavily in Parliament, and it will be soon implemented. You know, we've got all the evidence, and, you know, people like the idea. Some politicians did like the idea. But then there were other people, you know, some researchers and economists that were definitely against it, and were giving, you know, the BIG idea a really bad name, saying that it was unscientific and that it was biased, and that really casted a doubt on the impact of BIG, unfortunately. And especially the International Monetary Fund, which used inflated figures regarding the cost of the BIG, and said that it would be unaffordable, you know, to introduce BIG. It would be unaffordable for the Namibian government to pay for that. But then we had a meeting with the International Monetary Fund, and they finally admitted that they had used the wrong figures to calculate the costs for the BIG, that they were wrong about it. Even though they had admitted that they were wrong about it, all the press, you know, statements they were making had the wrong figures in it. They were still pushing their agenda. For what reason, I don't know. And unfortunately, that made some local politicians join the International Monetary Fund, and also they started questioning the BIG, and they thought that it wasn't really the best way to wipe out poverty in Namibia. And they also really thought that, yeah, why should, because it's universal, they were like, why should people get BIG, the ones that are not needed? And that's one of the things that I'm going to discuss a little bit later on how we tackle all those issues. Some of these issues are still upcoming. And we're working really hard on tackling all those. They're like, why should people, who are well off and get well paid, receive BIG? And they also argue that, the government should create more jobs instead of giving out money. But then they never created, a good economic condition in Namibia for people to have more employment, and they never had any good ideas on how poverty could be eradicated there. Everything had just stood still in this country. I think there's absolutely nothing going on, in regards to jobs and tackling poverty. And they completely ignored these wonderful, scientific results that we got from the BIG coalition. And they were also, ignoring the high unemployment rate that we have in Namibia, and that really made, which made the suggested choice between a job and the BIG a mockery. So the then president, during the time we were like really heavily campaigning, was Hifikepunye Pohamba. He decided, in early 2010 that BIG wasn't for Namibia at all, because he was afraid it would make people lazy. With all the scientific evidence that we had, that it's not the case. People actually make good use of opportunities that they get. And that, that we just felt like, okay, this government is not even thinking of implementing BIG, which was a huge disappointment. And so we suffered a huge setback. And the president, again, in 2014, made it clear in parliament that he was rejecting that whole BIG idea, even though some politicians really privately, supported the BIG idea. There wasn't much we could do at that time. Because the ruling party had the majority, they usually, overpower others in parliament, which is not the case anymore. Things, the political, way in Namibia is changing a bit. It seems like the SWAPO party's dominance is going down, but that's another story. Because they dominate, all the SWAPO people that even believed in BIG decided they're now gonna go along with what the president says. And everything, all the evidence we had, that was completely ignored. And unfortunately as well, with all the activities that we had, been working on, we thought that we were going to ignite a campaign that would be sustainable and put government under pressure to implement BIG, but unfortunately that didn't happen. Obviously the coalition members felt that this is not going anywhere, so they decided to leave, or to say that they just withdrew being active participants, especially the churches, which were the driving force behind the whole campaign. They just decided nothing at all. And they were also reluctant now to take a more challenging position, which I will talk about later. I'll give you an example of what a challenging position is. And they didn't want to differ openly with government. So, they just wanted a mellow campaign, and that was not going to help. We needed to be more aggressive in order to put the government under pressure to implement. So there was very little pressure on the government. People left, the trade unions as well, they were politicized, and they were mainly listening to whoever political party they were affiliated to, and the youth organizations as well, unfortunately didn't manage to to ignite young people to start demanding for BIG themselves. And now the condition, unfortunately, the condition in Oshivero has worsened. The living conditions are back to where they were when people were really poor and suffering. And the achievements that were made during the BIG pilot have vanished. So people are back to square one. Now they have to rely a lot on one another, like before, like many Namibians do. They usually have one person in a household that works, and then everybody depends on that salary. And one of the arguments that we use is that if BIG was introduced, that would, help people get out of generational poverty. At least this person that's working would be able to keep their money and use it for important things or things that they feel is important. And then the rest of the family members, if they got BIG, they wouldn't depend too much on the other person. And then, it would at least help to get people out of, the poverty chains. So some of the critics use that worsening situation, as an opportunity to claim that, BIG was never going to work. It's not sustainable anyways. Then we had elections in 2014, and we had a new president, Dr. Hage Geingob, and he said that he had declared war on poverty, and that would be his key focus. It would be the key focus of his administration. And he also established a new ministry, which was for eradicating poverty. And we thought that it was a good idea that the president had asked the former chairperson of the BIG coalition to be the minister of the new ministry of poverty eradication, and that was Bishop Gameta. So this gave us really new hope that, wow, this is it. This is really going to happen. And we thought that BIG would be used by both the president and Bishop Gameta, that it would be one of the key interventions to reduce poverty in Namibia. And actually, another thing that I need to mention is that during the BIG pilot project in Oshivero, the president, Hage Geingob is still president. He was donating money towards the pilot project. That was before he was president. So we felt that, wow, these are the two people. The one president believes in BIG, and then we've got somebody who's running the Ministry of Poverty, who exactly would be able to have this implemented because he knew the in and outs of BIG. And then after Bishop Gameta, was now Minister of Poverty Eradication, he had asked the coalition that he would roll out BIG within 6 months. And there we are waiting 6 months. And then he said that he also felt that he would be able to implement BIG. He was convinced that he would. And so he said that the coalition should prepare an updated financial model with concrete financial and implementation plans for submission to the cabinet. So we did everything they got, and there was like in 2015, nothing. And then comes 2019, and Bishop Gameta goes to Germany to attend a German church gathering called Kirchentag, where he announced that BIG would be rolled out in 2020. We are in 2021 now, nothing has happened. We are like, whoa, okay, we had high hopes. Nothing is happening. There's no plans in terms of concrete policies of introducing the BIG in Namibia. And poverty continues and unemployment continues. And then comes COVID-19, the pandemic, and things just got worse for Namibians because people lost their jobs. Some people's salaries were cut because the economy, everything was on lockdown. So we are like, okay, there's nothing happening. And, the
Is it possible that we have a breakdown in audio quality now? Or is it only me who cannot hear?
No, I think it is.
No, there's no audio.
Yeah. I will see if I can contact Rinaani somehow.
Okay, schreibst du? Ja.
Sehe ich das richtig, dass beide aus dem
Ja, die sind
aus
weg.
Zoom ja. Also ich hoffe, der Stromausfall hat sich nicht weiter verbreitet.
Aber sie kommen gerade wieder.
Ah ja, da passt schon.
Hello?
Okay, now we can hear you again.
I'm so sorry. What's the last thing that you heard from me?
How disappointing.
It's 2020 and
That you were trying to relaunch the campaign.
Oh, yes. Okay.
That was my last.
Yes, if you don't mind, Walter, if you don't mind keeping your mic on, you know, so I can hear you can hear a bit of rattle. So then I know that, okay, now I'm off online or online. Would you mind?
Okay, to stay unmuted.
No, she wants you to mute.
Hey.
No, to stay unmuted.
Yeah. So that you can hear some whatever noise in the background.
Okay, I make some noise so that you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just some whistling.
So we decided to relaunch in September last year, 2020, to continue pushing the government to implement BIG. And this time we were asking for 500 because life has become really expensive. So we were asking for 500 per person per month. For people aged 19 to 59, obviously, you know, we would find it really difficult to convince government to give it to everybody. So we felt that we should ask for the ages of 19 to 59 because there's no social protection cover for that age group. It's only when you turn 60 when you get the old age. And we also have the child grant and, you know, other grants for disabled people, those kind of things. But the government has stopped taking new applications for child grant. Unfortunately, they have a backlog and the economic conditions in Namibia are not so good as well. So they've stopped taking applications for child grant. So people are really having a tough time. So actually, we initially suggested 1,000 Namibian dollars per month, but some members felt that it would create a huge anti-campaign from the business community because they think that that's a lot of money that would make people stay at home. So we decided on 500. And yeah, so, you know, Namibia is a really expensive country because we depend a lot on imports, especially from South Africa. So even that 500, you know, wouldn't be enough. But at least, you know, we feel that it would be enough to guarantee people some basic food security, you know, and we think that is a step at least towards realizing people's basic rights so that each person in Namibia can live, you know, a decent standard of living. So we've managed to get all the organizations on board that, you know, or most of them to say, that we you know formed the coalition with the first time. So the church groups, some trade unions and youth groups and many other organizations. But at least, yeah, we are all in there. And then we're still having a small issue actually that some of the members did not agree with the fact that we wanted to use because there were upcoming elections. So we were thinking that using that slogan that says no BIG, no vote for you would really put a lot of people under pressure. And I think it has, even though it was discontinued later on. You know, we don't use that slogan anymore. We've changed it a little bit to vote BIG, which we think doesn't really give us, you know, a strong position to put government under pressure. So yeah, those are some of the issues that we have. And I think that the reason was that the reason we got from some of those organizations, especially the church, they were like, okay, this thing is making people not to want to go vote, but we try to explain the whole, you know, concept to them over and over again that this doesn't really, you know, stop people from voting. It just says that we only vote for the people who are empathetic towards Namibian suffering.
Just look on the screen.
That's the people we'd be voting for. So yeah, I think it was all about not wanting to be on the wrong side of the government. Really,
Okay.
it's just, you know, it's just the way it was. And that's something that we were hoping to avoid with the campaign that we had relaunched. We were like, okay, now this is the time, you know, after so many years, this is the time that we have to take a strong stand and really put pressure on the government. We were hoping to avoid that, but unfortunately, still among us, we got, you know, some organizations that don't want to be on the wrong side of the government. And you know, as I said, there were elections coming. Those were the regional and local elections, and we thought that this would be a good thing to put pressure on the government. But yeah, that didn't work. Some other issues that we are, okay, so, you know, I spoke about the socioeconomic situation in Namibia, that we have about, you know, we don't have any new data, but we guess that it should be like 40 to 50% of Namibians that are unemployed now, especially with the COVID as well, that people lost their jobs. You know, because of the lockdowns that came with the pandemic, things just got worse for Namibians. Many Namibians are really struggling to survive. And we also had a recession at the same time as the COVID came, a recession that started in 2016. And it added to this, you know, burden of Namibians trying to struggle every day for survival. Many people lost their jobs, as I mentioned. And you know, the thing with Namibia, because there's high unemployment, people try to find ways to survive on their own. So most people are employed in the informal economy, you know, selling, you know, fruits or sweets or, you know, some snacks along the road, that kind of thing. That's what most Namibians do, actually. But then when the pandemic came with the lockdowns, people were not allowed to trade. And, you know, for a lot of Namibians, that selling those sweets or apples or bananas next to the road is their only income. Now, the huge problems that people have lost their living, you know, that has cut them, the lockdowns have cut them off their only source of income, since they're not allowed to operate according to, you know, the way they were doing it before. So they're really struggling to sustain themselves, and it's impossible for them to live decent human lives. It's totally unacceptable, you know, the poverty levels and the struggle of the Namibian people. So then in September 2020, we relaunched the campaign. We were actually struggling to get media attention, but, you know, like a couple of weeks after, maybe to a month, the media started showing interest. So we got a lot of good coverage actually in the media, and that has made, you know, BIG become a public debate again. So far what we've done is, like, we obviously also want to, you know, engage the policymakers and the member of parliaments, but we've only managed to have two, you know, face-to-face conversation with two political parties, one called the People's Democratic Movement, and the other one is the Landless People's Movement. They are the only ones actually that had pronounced themselves on what they think of the whole idea. And the problem that we're having with them is, again, like, what it should be means tested. It should just be given to the people that are vulnerable and are unemployed and, you know, can prove that they are poor. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, how we try to tackle that as well. They just don't understand why it should be universal. But we have a good explanation for that. And then later on, something that made us really happy is that, you know, the government, which is, you know, ruled by SWAPO party, they came in as well in the debate, and they were saying that according to their own studies, BIG is only feasible with 389 Namibian dollars. That's per month per person. And it's also like, it sounds like it should only be given to people who are unemployed. That's a huge problem, some really huge thing we are struggling with. And we have to keep in mind that Namibia, actually, no, sorry to say, Windhoek is let's say 35% more expensive than Cape Town. Can you imagine? So the 389, it's very, we feel that it's very little money. It won't really take away the struggle of people, you know, people struggling for food. But the other thing is that we are really happy that the government is on board, that we can now engage with the government, and they are interested in talking about it. So there's some hope that, something might happen. But yeah, at the moment, because it's COVID, it's really making campaigning difficult. It's really difficult to campaign during this time of the COVID pandemic. So we got lots of activities online on Facebook, on Twitter and Instagram. We post regularly. And we also got some small funding from Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. They gave us small funding to produce 4 small, video clips that explain to people what BIG is all about, and that it's something really that's needed in Namibia. And, it's just some educational videos that are really working well on social media, because most social media platforms, like videos, it's easier to get a video promoted on social media. So that we try to to boost our campaign through social media now, because it's really difficult to campaign face to face. It's mainly through social media that we find out what people really think of BIG, and many Namibians feel that this is really the time that it should be implemented. Because people are now really struggling, especially now that it has been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the beginning of the year, when the pandemic just started, I think it was around April, the government decided to pay a 750 emergency income grant, which they felt that would, stimulate the economy. But there was just a once-off payment. So I think now the people feel that, okay, these things are possible. We got 750 in April, it was a once-off payment, but it should be regular because the pandemic is not over yet. So that has encouraged a lot of people to, like the BIG idea. And the people that are mainly against it are, the white population in Namibia. They're completely against it. I think maybe they think that the BIG will only be for Black people. I don't know, but lots of the comments that they come up with, it's like really horrible, stereotypical things that they say, that Blacks make too many babies and they are hardworking taxpayers. Why should they pay for lazy people who just keep making babies? And it will make Blacks lazy if they get BIG. And Blacks are lazy. They will just be drinking alcohol with the BIG money. So we counter all these negative things with, the positive results that we got from the Oshivero pilot project, that these are just claims that are untrue. We have evidence that, people make really good use of good opportunities that are presented to them, and they really take the initiative to improve their lives. So we also try to tell people that 500 we are asking for is not even enough to make people stay home. It's just intended so that people at least don't have to worry about where the next meal will come from. So 500 will not deter people from looking for work. It's very little money, because Namibia is a very expensive country. We depend too much on imports. And according to the research that we know of, is that when somebody has a little bit of more money or income, that also kind of like encourages them to look for work. It increases their capacity to look for work. And so BIG will be more like a springboard for people to go out there and try to look for work and earn a bit more money. And the other issues that we also come across is, where's the government going to get the money from? Now that's also another huge issue. And we tell people that of course affordability is a political matter. The government just has to shift its priorities. It's just, if they really want to, BIG would be possible. And I'm going to also explain what else we say with that. Is that I don't know if you've heard about the fish rod case. The corruption that's been ongoing, especially the fish rod case that I can refer to, is that there's corruption, and I think the government, the taxpayers' money are being used on unproductive activities, and if we need good governance policies to make sure that state funds are not lost to wasteful spending and fraudulent or abusive activities. In that way, we'll be able to, to mobilize money and afford BIG, which I will talk about a little bit later, how much it would cost. So, and then we also said that, we also say to the people that, the government could make some tax adjustments. That means that higher income earners would be subsidizing the BIG, which is a fairly easy arrangement. It's also really a good way of distributing wealth and reducing poverty. So it's actually just the initial cost of setting up the whole system that will be the main thing that will cost a little bit more money. But once the whole system is set up, the cost will go down, and BIG will pay for itself in many other ways. For example, BIG will be an economic stimulus package that will give people more money and give people, the buying power, which means that they will be buying more, especially from the local economy, and that's going to make money circulate in the economy. So we believe that the BIG is just another tax adjustment system that just brings more money to government, really. So, and we also feel like the mining industry and the fishing industries, those two industries should now really, they make billions of profits, but and now they should really pay their due share of taxes, because they've got all these lucrative incentives that they get from government, economic processing zone companies, especially the ones in the mining, that says that they don't have to pay this amount of tax, that kind of tax thing. So, and also they themselves also find other ways to evade tax. And there's quite a lot of illicit financial flows issues in Namibia, and that results in the government losing a lot of money that they could use to finance, BIG. Namibia is not a poor country at all. It's rich, but with lots of poor people. And then the other thing I was going to quickly explain is that why should the well-off people receive BIG? Why should it be universal for that age group 19 to 59? And we say that it's really impossible for the government. It's administratively impossible for the government to identify the intended recipients, the people that really need BIG. If it's going to be means tested, as people constantly move in and out of poverty, because Namibia has a high precarious labor market. And if it's going to be made mean tested, it means that the poor, the most poorest people who need this, they will miss out on it, because they are by nature, the most disadvantaged when it comes to accessing information and infrastructure and administrative services. Sometimes they don't have the means to get this paper, and it would just cause a lot of mess that the government, it will actually cost the government more. At the end of the day, they would spend more money on the administrative part of the BIG, money that could have been given to people. So those are some of the arguments that we use. So BIG being made universal is much, much cheaper. And I mentioned before that it's an economic stimulus package, which, would pay for itself at the end of the day. And we try to tell people that they should focus more on the positive things that the BIG will bring in our society. For example, crime will go down, as proven by the BIG Oshivero pilot project, and people will be, so the government will spend less money on all the other services like health, and because people's health improves, and then when crime goes down, it means that less services towards the justice system, that kind of thing. So we should look at the positive things that the BIG would bring. It will also, at the end of the day, just improve our society. So those are the kind of arguments that we use. So according to our calculations, BIG will only cost 4 billion per year. That is less than what the Defense Ministry gets. They get 6 billion. There's no war. We don't see any war. We don't see any threat towards Namibia. And, our army hasn't up to date offered any tangible results. Our military has recently been ranked as one of the most useless in the world, the weakest to say. So we like, you're giving money to the wrong government agencies, instead of, trying to get money together, mobilize money and, pay for BIG, that will improve the entire society. One of the things that I should also mention is that we were actually part of the government's social protection policy, in which they ask, what we would suggest the government should implement, and obviously we suggested BIG, but I think the government also mentioned BIG in there, and then they were like, people, they're thinking of, should they implement BIG, people will get less than 300, and obviously I think they're also going to make it only for people who can prove that they are poor, they're unemployed. So I think we find that to be a really huge threat. If they implement that, we want at least 500, but it seems like if they implement BIG, then it will be less money than what we wanted actually. So people will still continue to struggle to find, or afford proper food so they can live a decent human life. And as I said, I'm about to round off now. And as I said before, the COVID pandemic has made, campaigning really difficult. It's really, really difficult. But the other thing that really encourages us is that the government is at least engaging in the BIG debate, and they've, proposed the amount that they've proposed, even if it's not ideal. And we need to build more grassroots support to pressurize government. We want people themselves to start demanding for BIG, demanding it from their, political representatives. And we try to get media attention at least once a week. It's a lot of work. At least once a week, we try to get something in the media because it was a festive season now. It's been a bit quiet, but we are back on track. We're going to start, pushing, our media campaign. And we haven't done much radio campaigning because costs, and radio is a really good tool because it reaches a wide range of Namibians, people in the rural areas. Everybody has a radio set. But unfortunately, we haven't started with that because we don't have funding. We're just operating on, voluntary basis. As I said, we only had 2 political parties engaged. We need to engage more political parties and MPs, and lobby them to get the conversation going in Parliament. And hopefully that will pressurize the government to implement the 500 BIG that we are asking for. And we really try our best to convince them that it's efficient and affordable tool to fight poverty and stimulate, economic recovery. One thing that I forgot to mention is that the political party, one of the political parties that we've engaged with, the Landless People's Movement, has actually brought a motion in Parliament whereby they're asking for the government to introduce the 750 Namibian dollars BIG, at least for the unemployed people, that they feel could be, running for the next 2 years. So we do support that political party because at least they, they're working on the idea, even though their idea is not ideal for us. We don't want it to be means tested. It's going to be really messy and people will miss out. We want it to be universal, so people don't have to prove that they are poor or they don't work, because the labor situation in Namibia is really, really precarious. Now to round off for real, Namibia is really regarded by the international community to be capable of successfully implementing the BIG. And I think that Namibia will make history if we implement BIG, and we'll gain a lot of respect from the international community, especially our leaders that always want to be praised. They will gain a lot of respect, for spearheading the idea. And we feel that, by Namibia spearheading the idea, it will revive the African Ubuntu value, because they are showing some empathy towards struggling Namibians, and they're at least making some progress towards reducing poverty and inequality. That is, if BIG gets implemented. We have the old age pension, the state pension, which has really showed us that BIG is not a problem to implement at all. We already have systems in place that the government can use and learn from and see how PIG could be implemented. And also the 750 emergency grant that was paid out to people at the beginning of the year, which was a bit problematic because some people haven't received their money yet because they weren't able to prove that they are unemployed and they are poor. So there are some people who haven't got it, so they are very, very unhappy, and that's what we are trying to avoid. We just want to make sure that people that really need it are covered and they are receiving the basic income. So that 750 income grant was fairly easily paid through the telephone. You would just get a message saying that you would apply through the phone as well, just by text message. And then when you're successful, they also send you another text message where we just go to the bank and get your money out. That's a really easy and very cheap system that the government can use to implement BIG. So, you know, there is nothing difficult about it at all. You know, there is fairly a comprehensive database to facilitate a permanent universal BIG scheme for Namibians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rinaani. You gave us a broad overview about what happened and happens in Namibia, and okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that Namibia was one of the first countries, or even the first country, to test it out in practice in a village. And we are aware of the fact that the BIG idea or plans are discussed in many countries worldwide. So you mentioned some of the pros and cons. And the question to Lukas Schlögl, who is now the one who comments on your lecture, is these pros and cons are also under debate internationally. So from your perspective, can you add something to the presentation from an international point of view? How do you feel about the strategies and demands which this campaign in Namibia has or is putting forward? So the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks very much. And I'll try to keep this quite short so we can open this up for broader discussion. And before I go into any detail, I shall say, well, I'm basically sold. I think we've just heard a very compelling case for extending this universal basic income in Namibia, as eloquently described by Rinaani. So my comments will be very sympathetic to that cause. And I'll just make quick points on three areas, I think. One is the rationale for universality and unconditionality. Two is the political feasibility of a project like this, and three are issues around the financing of UBI. I think these are the sort of three, I guess, contentious areas that that always come up in any debate on UBI wherever. Generally speaking, I think there's a resurgence in the interest and in the UBI. Broadly speaking, in the West and beyond, there are various pilot projects being trialed around the world, albeit typically in limited scale. We've had policy initiatives in Switzerland recently. There's been a pilot in Finland, which was albeit discontinued. There are also long historical projects with a long legacy, like the Alaska Permanent Fund, for instance, which has given a small, I guess, basic income, if you want to call it like that, to residents in Alaska. Anyway, there is this resurgence, and it is also noted, I think, by international organizations. So you can see, if you check the World Social Protection Report, for instance, by the ILO, they recognize that they've slightly moved away from their complete a disagreement with UBI, and they say now that it's not at odds with the kind of social protection floor that they advocate for, which is their sort of prime recommendation. It's also in the air because I think of technological change. So I'm an expert. Well, I'm interested in the automation debate, and it's clearly in this context there's a lot of interest in UBI, and on top of that, I think in the current pandemic crisis, there's also a sort of climate of, I guess, social policy experimentation that could well be harnessed towards that end. But we should clearly be aware that this remains an uphill battle, despite technological change, despite that interest, and despite that climate of social policy experimentation. And I think Rinaani is clearly aware of that, and you've hinted at some of the resistance towards a project like that. Namibia is one of the most unequal societies or economies in the world. You've said that yourself. I think that the Gini index is somewhere around 0.6 or something like that. So an unconditional transfer in an environment like that is, you could almost say, a provocation to some degree, or it's a bold claim that this would be the appropriate social policy in a setting where economic resources are distributed very unequally. You'd think, well, we need something progressive, we need something means tested, we need something targeted, right? And that is what you can read in the literature as well. So in preparation of this event, I've quickly skimmed into the social protection report by the OECD on Namibia, for instance, which was quite recent. And they say they recommend, I'm quoting, reprioritizing allocations to the programs most effective at reducing poverty, ensuring that targeting mechanisms where these exist operate efficiently. So they're very bullish on targeting. Also, it seems in the political debate in Namibia, even the opposition is not quite convinced yet. So I read, for instance, that the PDM leader said recently that they'd only support a grant that targets citizens living below the poverty threshold. Again, a quote here: "It must be intended to reduce hunger and the country's Gini coefficient," he said. And this was also reiterated by another member of parliament who argued that it should be for those who need it most. So I think that's basically the uphill battle there. Why not a grant of, say, $1,000 Namibian for the more needier segment of recipients? Now, I'm well aware that that you advocate for progressive financing. So I think it may actually not be a completely universal transfer or a completely unconditional transfer that you are advocating for, but something perhaps de facto more like a negative income tax, where you have a sort of progressivity built into it. But I think there's still some excellent points you've made that on why unconditionality is particularly appropriate. One thing I think that could be hammered home really is this issue that you're getting this reproach that, well, this is a sort of laziness endeavor, or will trigger laziness. And I think UBI is exactly the opposite of that in a sense. It's exactly a social policy or a transfer mechanism that does not induce laziness, or it's what economists call incentive compatible. Why is it incentive compatible? Because you get it whether you work or not. It's not a reward for not working. On the contrary, you continue to receive it. So it exactly rids that problem, which you do actually have in some developed welfare systems, where the minimum wage may be quite low and maybe social protection might be quite generous. So in some cases, people may be wondering, well, should I take up work? Should I take up part-time work? Actually, I may on net lose some of my benefits, and I may be slightly worse off taking up work. So a UBI ensures that exactly that isn't the case, because you continue to receive the transfer whether you work or not. So it's not an incentive for laziness. It isn't. It simply isn't. It's precisely not a reward, and especially at the very low levels, essentially far below subsistence even, that you're advocating for. It's pretty unimaginable that anyone would be able to live a comfortable life, basically, in the safety net of such a transfer. I think you make a very excellent point on this being an appropriate measure also for a society with a lot of informal work. So what we know from a lot of social policy research around the world, I find the project of Nora Lustig especially interesting in that regard. It's called the Commitment to Equity project, where they've looked at various welfare or social protection systems in developing countries, from Latin America to Southeast Asia, with a couple of African countries as well, case study based and very empirically rigorous. And what they show is that in many cases, these systems are quite regressive, because they tend to cover people in formal employment and people in public work. And they have, for instance, unemployment insurance, health insurance, pension insurance, things like that. But the vast majority of more sort of precariously or informally employed people do not have demands against this kind of welfare system. So you have to be, I think, quite cautious to not create a system where post-tax inequality is actually higher in some countries than pre-tax inequality. And I think against this background, if you have a large, poor and informally employed population, this kind of simple transfer it may well be the way to go. I think there's also clearly arguments along the lines of the inefficiencies of means testing, especially in a country with low administrative capacity, also potentially issues around corruption. The more transparent and the simpler the transfer is, I think, the better, in a sense. If it's just automatically, basically, transferred onto your mobile phone account, or you can get it from the post office, that's ideal, basically. And the less paperwork and the less sort of involvement of any personnel, the better, I guess. What's interesting and what makes this case different from the UBI debate as it's being had in Western countries is that it doesn't seem to be, I think, intended as a replacement for existing social policies. In fact, not that many social policies exist, and I think the pension rewards, you said, stay in place anyway, and they are unconditional, or they're flat anyway. So that would just build upon that. In the West, you often have the debate around, well, we could have one universal transfer, but we'd have to get rid of a whole social policy bureaucracy. And towards that, I'm a bit skeptical, I have to say, because I think that these simple transfers are also easier to roll back, basically. So the bureaucracy has the unintended benefit of ingraining in law and in institutions provisions of welfare that are very hard to undo politically, essentially. And we had a debate in Austria and in the recent government, for instance, around the Mindestsicherung, which is a sort of basic anti-poverty transfer, and about the level of that. And you can see how quickly things like that get politicized. So if you have just one transfer, I'd be worried about that in a country with a developed welfare state. But in Namibia, I think this worry isn't there. Basically, you're starting to build something rather than replacing an existing system. So a lot of the usual arguments against UBI, I think, won't work. I also think, I mean, the argument with crime is just great. That's a politically a very interesting argument as well. Okay, quick point on political feasibility. So that's one point. For instance, if you read the ILO report, they say, while UBI may contribute to closing coverage gaps, its financial, economic, and political feasibility poses important challenges. And that is true. I think in that regard, COVID is probably a window of opportunity because it sort of affects everybody similarly. And you can make the case that it's not through people's fault that they are in economic stress. It's not because they've been lazy. It's not because things along those lines, right? They're simply experiencing an adverse shock and through non-fault of their own. What's interesting, I've been involved in the Austrian in an empirical study that is being carried out in Austria as a representative population survey. And we've asked the population of Austria how much in favor they are regarding UBI. And what we found is that between April and August, so in a relatively short time span, the agreement with or appetite for a UBI kind of transfer in Austria grew by 7 percentage points roughly. That's quite strong. It's a quite strong increase within a relatively short period of time. We're going to ask that question once more down the road. But what we've seen now is that actually a slight majority in Austria is quite pro, or at least slightly pro the UBI, and that was not the case pre-crisis. So I think this is a window of opportunity to harness, and I think it's clever that you argue for a relatively small transfer at the beginning, which can always be scaled up later. What you I think need to do with social policy experiments like this is get people used to it, get it running in the sense, get people used to the feel of it in the sense, buy in the middle class as well, who will also enjoy it and maybe spend it on consumption or whatever, and then you can push for extending it. But better than go in with an amount that is unpalatable politically. My final point on the financing. So you've made some suggestions there. I think in the interview you gave for the magazine, you proposed it was based on a progressive income tax, and now you've added some other sources. Now, I might be naive, but one source of financing I find quite for social policy provisions of this kind of experimental and universalist kind of character is natural resources. And I'm thinking, for instance, of Norway's oil fund. They used the surplus revenues from oil and they put it into a giant pension fund, which is also invested in the stock market ethically, so it's insured against the country risk, and basically every Norwegian citizen has a claim towards that, and quite a massive one by now. So it's quite a massive fund. Now Namibia has a very profitable mining sector, which I've read produces something like 10% of the world mining output in uranium, for instance. It employs a very small fraction of the population. So this is it's a classical automation case. It's a classical, very capital intensive industry where all the work is done by machines. And that's why it's so profitable. It's a sector where the robots have taken over. So I think unless this is politically extremely challenging to pull off, there may well be a case to think about, rather than taxing income, which affects basically everybody, taxing company profits in that context. I think these kind of natural resource rents are generally a good source normatively. I think in addition to that, and I know that many countries, I don't know the structure in Namibia, but I know in many countries these mining operations and similar operations are done by multinational corporations, and very often they repatriate the profits, so you can't capture them, or you can't properly tax the profits from operations like that. I also think, generally speaking, that does not apply to Namibia specifically, that there's a case for the international donor community to fund initiatives like that. Austria is not extremely active, actually not at all in the very south of Africa, but I think generally, and I've made that point with a colleague recently as well, there is a sort of case to be made for a sort of global universal basic income almost, that should be at least co-subsidized in a sense by the rich countries, especially by taxing profits from multinational operations. And I'll shut up with that, and yeah, let's open it up for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schlögl. I think that was enlightening comments, adding some points to Rinaani's presentation, but also putting them into a wider context. Thank you very much, both of you. And the floor is open now for questions or comments. I have one question already, which I think is directed to both of you, and everyone who wants to come into the discussion, please specify, is it more directed to Rinaani or to Lukas Schlögl or to both, so that we really try to bring everyone into the debate. It is also possible to ask questions or comment in German language, and I will try, or someone will try to translate into English. So there's the one question I have received already, I think by chat, everyone has got it, is Bernhard Butzek asking about or proposing to have a clear financial plan for the big campaign, for the BIG campaign. And actually, both of you have spoken about finance. That is one of the very sensitive issues for people to support in Namibia, but also for the government, obviously. Tax policies is very complicated. And Bernhard gives the example of a value-added tax. To raise the VAT would probably be detrimental for the poor, particularly. On the other hand, taxing tobacco or alcohol seems more promising. Rinaani has also mentioned maybe a levy for tourists, and Bernhard draws our attention to the fact in Thailand that they have indicated to introduce such a tourism levy to finance the public health service after the COVID-19 pandemic. So that would be maybe a reference example for Namibia. So can you please, Rinaani particularly, but also Lukas Schlögl, can you please elaborate a little bit more about your plans or your ideas about financing?
Yes. Yeah, we also feel that it's really, really important to have a detailed plan on, the cost, on how much the BIG is going to cost. that's a very important thing. And at the moment, we are very much working on it, and we are hoping to, to get funding on that, so we can have someone or an expert to help us come up with a detailed plan on how much exactly the BIG would cost. Although we do have our own calculations, as I said, which is about 4 billion, that will be about 4 billion per year. But obviously, yes, we need a more detailed plan. Yes, so as I mentioned before, we feel that the government can finance the BIG by, making it universal, and then taxing the people who earn, who have a high income, tax them, so that in that way, the money that was given to them, as we feel that maybe they earn a lot, they might not need it, comes back to the government. So that's one of the things that we really felt that the government could do. And also the other thing that I already touched on, that the government should start using the country's natural resources to fund BIG. And the government should also stop, the misuse of state funds on unnecessary things. And hopefully we believe that that would get together, or that will enable us to mobilize funds to finance the BIG. Yes.
And what about this?
So those are kind of like the
go ahead.
Sorry, continue.
No, this proposal of having a sort of, like Norway does, a fund for the mining industry.
Yes, we've had people on social media comment on that, actually, that they felt that that's something that could be done, similar to what Norway is doing, and have the mining and the fishing industries, pay proper taxes, and that that money could be used to finance a BIG. But most of Namibia's mines are foreign owned. I think Namibia mostly has like 10% shares in those government. I mean, in the mining industry especially. So I'm not 100% sure how much money that would be, that could be put in a wealth fund like they do in Norway. But yes, we are hoping that by taxing the mining companies and getting rid of all these incentives that they have for them, could at least help us raise some funds for the BIG.
Okay, thank you. I am told that someone raised his or her hand, probably for an oral comment, but I cannot see anyone.
Yes, I have my hand up.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is Vongile. I have a couple of questions for both presenters. So one thing I would want to know, we would want to know, is how do you make sure that you give that 500 per person? Because as you said, that the person just has to pick up the call, pick up the phone, and then go to the bank and collect the check. So how would it be possible to make sure that there's no fraud, or that there are no people collecting checks more than once a month? That's one question. The other question I have is about BIG generally, because I'm shocked to find out that it's happening in the richest countries like Finland and so on. That doesn't it not also depend that the general finance system should be non-capitalist? Because what I'm thinking is, if they, like they were trying to do it in America, if they give people $500, then the prices of everything else will go up. In other words, the capitalistic business people will just put prices higher, which means that those people will have to spend that money paying higher prices. So my question is, how will we guarantee that that doesn't happen. And also when it comes to Austria, I think it does exist in a way, the BIG. I don't know, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we
Yeah,
hear you clearly.
it does exist in a way in Austria, because as far as I know, children and youth up until the age of 27, they do get this Kinderbeihilfe, so they do get them at least through their parents. For each child, the state gives money unconditionally to the parents. So it already does exist in Austria in that way, in my opinion. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But if you put it at the ages between 19 and 59, is that not a much bigger part of the population? In other words, what I'm trying to say is whether shifting it to a more youth-orientated type of BIG for until people, I mean, I'm not familiar with the economics and levels of poverty in Namibia, but what I'm thinking is that to give it too much more to younger people until they can find their way and get financially stabilized, whether that will be possible. And also, as for this, what you're saying about the white people in Namibia not wanting, being totally against BIG, is it not much more because of the racism, basically? Because as long as they don't view themselves as Namibian like other Black Namibians, they will not recognize, because like I said, it does exist in Austria, but that's because there's no racial line as to which child gets BIG and which doesn't. So in the case of Namibia, do you not have that problem that the people who own most of the assets, most of the land, probably those uranium mines, belong to white people, that as long as they don't see themselves as Namibian as other Black people, they just won't recognize that. And like they always say in America that Black people are only lazy if they refuse to be enslaved. If they're enslaved, then they're not lazy. So what do you think about that? That's my question.
Okay. Should I answer that now?
Yeah,
You can.
Okay.
I think to
Yes.
it.
I think what Sibongile was trying to say, if I understood her correctly, is that maybe some people feel that BIG might cause an inflation or something in that line. But yeah, that's something that is a little bit difficult for me to answer. But I think there are also many other studies that prove that BIG wouldn't cause an inflation. Maybe Lukas can help me out on that a little bit. And Sibongile was saying that the BIG is probably best that it's given to the youth. Yes, we are asking for BIG to be given to people between the ages of 19 to 59, because then when you are 18 and below, you are still in school and you fall under your parents' care. So it's mainly like when you're 19 and you're out of school that we feel that people should get a BIG, and that covers a lot of young people who will be out of school and at the same time as well out of work. Yeah, so I hope that I'm making myself clear to Sibongile. And the racial issue that you mentioned, it's definitely is the case, as you are saying. One example I could make is, for example, the United States. I think one of the reasons why they, have been so much against the universal healthcare system is because they feel that if Black people are also going to be part of the universal healthcare, then nobody should get it. Of course, yeah, there are lots of racial motivations behind that whole thing. Why the white population in Namibia wouldn't want people to receive BIG, because they don't deserve it. That's basically it. They really don't deserve it. Yes. So I hope I've made myself clear.
Yes, you have. Do you know any way to tackle that racial? I mean, I know it's a huge undertaking to tackle that racial problem.
Yes. The way we tackle that is to tell, we're also going to try and organize some meetings with the business community in Namibia. And the best way for us to tackle that is to tell the business community that, you know, that BIG will also benefit them in the sense that, you know, the more money people have, the more they will buy from the local economy and, you know, use local services, and that would, of course, you know, create some profit for their businesses. I think that's the main argument we use, actually. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I
Yes.
just try to fix the...
Okay, maybe Lukas Schlögl, can you say?
I can
Can you
add my
add
2
something? Yes, please.
Yes, I can add my 2 cents on the inflation bit. So it's a bit of a tricky issue, but generally, orthodox economic theory would. I'm getting an echo.
Maybe can all except the speaker mute their microphones?
Yeah. Okay. So generally, economic theory would tell us that inflation has something to do with the quantity of money. Essentially, when you print money, or too much money, or more money than you had previously printed, then prices will go up. That's the monetarist theory of money. So the more money supplied, the higher the price level will get. You can also get to inflation through scarcity or monopolistic situations. This is the situation that you imagined when a capitalist sort of could charge whatever they want, so to speak. So this is the case in some sectors, temporarily in some countries, but I don't think it's the case, generally speaking, in market economies. So a retail company like Hofa or something like that, they can't just charge what they want. If they could, they charge much more, but they are in competition with other retail suppliers. So, and competition puts a natural brake on the price they can charge. Now, a UBI does not change the quantity of money. We're not advocating for the central bank of Namibia to print money and give that cash to people, but rather we are arguing, or Rinaani is arguing for a sort of redistribution. So you first have to take away the money from people, and then you have to distribute it. But it's not newly created money. So unless the market is extremely concentrated in some way or extremely monopolistic, my expectation is not that this would create inflation, but these are theoretical statements. At the end of the day, you'd have to see it empirically, and you'd have to roll out the program and see if inflation ensues. That is part of the problem with these big social experiments, right? That you have to try them and see if they go wrong in a sense. But I wonder, I mean, Rinaani, in the Ojivero project, you would have seen if this creates inflation locally. You would have noticed that. So if it wasn't the case, chances are it wouldn't be the case if rolled out nationally either. But I mean, policies are subject to falsification. If it turns out this creates huge inflation, should be discontinued. By the way, the Kinderbeihilfe, I'm not aware of any empirical evidence that this will create inflation. I think you're making a good point there. I mean, it is a sort of universal, maybe not an unconditional transfer. It's also not an individual transfer because it goes to the family or to the parents. But it is something akin to it. So you're right about that. also in the COVID situation, we had transfer to people from the cultural sector, temporary albeit. That was also sort of an unconditional transfer, short-term rescue measure, sort of. So there is experimentation in that regard. The Finland example has been, I think, discontinued now, but yeah.
Yeah, can you just also say something about preventing fraud? How do you prevent fraud?
Can we put that a little bit on hold, because I have two other questions. Sibongile, is it okay?
Yes.
Thank you, but we come back to that. I have two questions now. One is, I think by Mr. Piligshammer or Mrs. Piligshammer, I think that is related to the universality of the grant. Rinaani has explained that it would be very complicated to determine who is entitled to get it and who not. So if it was not universal, but the question is, the question says, would it be feasible that people opt out from the model because of solidarity, for example, or because they consider themselves as too wealthy, so that they say, okay, it's fine, you can have the grant, but I don't want to get it. I opt out from the possibility of getting a universal grant. I think that is how I understood the question. I'm not sure if Rinaani has now had the possibility to hear. Rinaani, could you hear what the question is?
Yes, absolutely. Sibongile was asking about fraud regarding
No, we put that we put that a little bit for a later stage. The question was, if it is a universal grant, can people, wealthy people, for example, opt out? Say, no, I don't want it. It's fine. You give it to everyone, but I don't want to get it.
Yes, absolutely. People can really can choose if they want to be, if they want to receive it or not.
Okay, that is part of your model.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
I guess people could give away money anyway, so nobody forces you to keep money to yourself, right?
Yes,
you mean in
exactly.
terms of donations?
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea was if you receive it and you don't really need it, it would also be good for the you know, for charities that are able to donate the money that they don't need.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Ilse Hanak, I think you raised your hand. Eli, du musst dein Mikrofon einschalten.
Jetzt.
Jetzt geht's, ja. Eli, jetzt müsste es gehen. Wir hören dich nicht. We cannot hear you.
Jetzt.
Darf ich ganz kurz was sagen? Das Problem ist, dass wir da, oder geht's jetzt, Ilse?
Es hat dieses Störgeräusch.
Bitte nicht das Mikro anmachen, also wenn das tatsächlich so ist, dass man da...
Kannst du vielleicht schreiben?
Genau, weil das Problem ist, wenn man doppelt eingeloggt ist, dann kommt dieser Echo-Effekt dauernd. Also deswegen werden wir nichts hören können. Also entweder muss man an dem einen Computer... Also am besten nicht mehr anmachen, bitte. Ja? Genau, bitte ganz kurz zuhören. An dem einen Computer muss der Ton ganz ausgeschalten sein auch. Ich glaube, leider wird es nichts werden, weil wir können nichts hören. Das
Eli,
ist...
kannst du das bitte in den Chat schreiben?
Abgeschrieben.
ich würde vorschlagen, may I propose that we take Sibongile's question now on the fraud issue. And in the meantime, I try to phone Ilse Hanak in Salzburg. Maybe we can work it out in that way. Is that okay? So,
Okay, sure.
Ja, bitte.
I think when you make BIG universal, there will be less fraud. It's when it's means tested that it will be creating a lot of fraud around it. I mean, the experience that we have from our old age pension, there is very little fraud reported, around our old age pension. And we believe that once you make it means tested, then the government officials who are working with it are able to forge documents and then apply, for the grant. But once it's universal, there will be little chance for whoever, whether it's officials or other people, to forge things and get BIG by fraudulent ways.
Okay, thank you.
And Rinaani, may I follow up in terms of the mode of disbursement? This goes directly onto your mobile phone account, or how would this be administered, the cash transfer? You have to unmute yourself.
That's just one of the systems that we that I made an example of. That it's really not complicated administratively to implement the BIG. Mm-hmm. That's just one of the things that could be used. But otherwise, with the old age pension, people get their money deposited by the government into a post office account. Mm-hmm. And that's where all the old people go and get their money from.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is how it could work as well for the UBI grant.
Yeah, and they're using fingerprinting as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you go there, you identify yourself, and take the cash home.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So you would actually have to be there in person in order to receive your pension money. Nobody else can go and get it on your behalf unless you go with that person.
Do poor people have bank accounts in Namibia, generally speaking?
Generally speaking, yes, people do have bank accounts. Yeah, I would say that most people do have bank accounts actually.
Including the poor.
Yes, I would say, but then, there is the post office account that is much more cheaper and cheaper to manage. So generally speaking, yes, people do have bank accounts, but then, just to make sure that people don't miss out, I felt that mobile system that they used to disperse the emergency income grant was really good, just to make sure that nobody misses out who doesn't have a bank account.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. I have one question now from Ilse Hanak, which concerns the abbreviations the two of you have used, because Rinaani speaks about the BIG, the basic income grant, and Lukas spoke about the universal
big income.
So can you explain,
income.
Is this actually the same, or is it two different concepts behind the abbreviations?
It's exactly the same thing. I think UBI is used in Western countries, while we, say for example in Southern Africa, we use the BIG, the basic income grant. I know that in the US and other countries they use universal basic income. It's just that we don't put universal in front of our acronym or whatever you call it. We don't put universal, we just say basic income grant. And then the other Western countries don't put grant, after the universal basic income. So they leave out the grant, we add the grant, and they put in the universal, and we leave out the universal.
Yeah, these are just generic terms, no difference.
Walter, versuchst du was zu sagen? Walter? Ich glaube, du bist
Oh, sorry.
Ja.
Sorry. The second question from Mrs. Hanak was regarding the cell phone. Is it really the case that everyone in Namibia has a cell phone, even if unemployed or a very poor rural area?
Yes, cell phones are widely used in Namibia. I would say they're like, everybody. Yeah, everybody has a cell phone, at least the most simple, phone that doesn't really have to be a smartphone. I'm sure that most Namibians have cell phones, and I think that's why the government, when they pay out, they paid out that emergency income grant at the beginning of the pandemic outbreak, decided to use cell phones because everybody, I would say, have cell phones. It would be a good way of dispersing, the BIG as well.
Thank you. I don't see any other question right now, and the time is actually has actually progressed. So I ask for the final round. If there is any other question or comment, please come forward now. But I don't see any. So I think we have reached the end of our meeting. Not well, actually, except the announcements, which are regular part. But thank you very much for now for all the contributions made from the auditorium, and of course the two panelists, Rinaani Musutua and Lukas Schlögl. I think you have enlightened us quite a lot about the issue of basic income grant in Namibia, but also internationally. And it will certainly be a topic which we will follow closely, and will hopefully have another opportunity to talk about it, to write about it, to inform the Austrian public about how it is, how it goes. So thank you very much to everyone, also to the Nina and Helena in the background, who have managed actually successfully to steer us through some technical hiccups, and oral hiccups, which
Bravo.
happened. Unfortunately, because of the situation, we cannot propose to go to our neighboring pub as we usually do for an informal afterthought or after talk. Hopefully there will come a time when this will be possible again. On the other hand, these meetings with these electronic programs, they are a bit difficult and not as direct as a personal, a real meeting. But on the other hand, it makes possible that people from different parts in the world join in. It would have been very difficult to have Rinaani traveling to Austria and to give a presentation. So modern technology is actually also has its advantages. And also, as it was said in the beginning, that we put the recording of this meeting onto our website, and it will be much better accessible as if it was only a lecture in a small library in Vienna, which is devoted to Southern African issues. We organized this sort of meetings. We call it the Forum Südliches Afrika every month, except July, August. And in February, next meeting, next presentation will be the result of a research project our organization was involved in. Actually, we have been involved in that for quite some years. It goes much beyond Southern Africa or even Africa. It is an international project, and it is now to be finalized very soon. It concerned the issue of prisoners in the concentration camp of Mauthausen in Upper Austria from Africa, but beyond, from other continents. So prisoners from outside Europe, I would say. We have made an empirical study. There is about numbers, names. There are 3 South Africans who have been in Mauthausen. A lot of other Africans, mostly North Africans, but not only. And this is also to report back to you the findings of this research, which took up some of our resources over the last years. So that will be in February. I'm not exactly sure now what the date is. It's Thursday. Is it the 24th? Is the 24th of February a Thursday? I hope it is. Yeah, danke. Thank you. Someone is encouraging me.
No, I think it's Wednesday, the 24th.
Okay, then it should. Sorry, I forgot my
25th is the Thursday.
25th.
21st of February?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it a Thursday?
Yeah.
Donnerstag.
Yeah, Donnerstag, Thursday, 25th of February. Again, 7 o'clock afternoon or PM, and you are also most welcome. So for now, I say goodbye. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks to Rinaani, thanks to Dr. Schlögl. It was a really interesting and enlightening conversation and presentation. And I also want to thank all the, not many, but quite a few people from Namibia who participated. We appreciate it very much. And thanks also to Herbert Jauch, who gave us a short introduction in the beginning on the Shoprite strike in Namibia. I wish you a good evening and hope to see most of you again in February. Thank you very much. Goodbye and good night.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Thank you for
Bye-bye.
your support.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rinaani.
Thank you.
The support was well deserved.
No more power cuts.
Yeah, my God.
Gosh, it's raining as we speak.
Ah.